5 bullets. That's what he had left when the enemy started climbing toward him in the darkness. 5 pieces of brass and lead between survival and slaughter, between holding the line and watching his brothers die. Sergeant Jack Colbert lay flat on a muddy ridge in the Pacific jungle, his Springfield rifle pressed against his cheek. Below him, in the darkness, he could hear them coming. Hundreds of footsteps, whispered commands in Japanese, the metallic click of bayonets being fixed to rifles. They were hunting him, and they were getting closer. Jack's hands were shaking, not from fear, though God knows he had reason to be afraid, from exhaustion. He'd been on this ridge for 14 hours without food, water, or rest. His body wanted to shut down, wanted to sleep, wanted to quit. But if he quit, everyone died. The wounded men evacuating below, the medics carrying them, his brothers. So Jack steadied his breathing, wiped the sweat from his eyes, and chambered one of his 5 remaining rounds. Click. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the jungle's silence. Somewhere below, a Japanese soldier stopped moving, listening, trying to pinpoint where that sound came from. Jack became a statue, a shadow, a ghost that breathed but didn't exist. This is the story of one American sniper who held off an entire enemy battalion with 5 bullets, who won a battle not through superior firepower, but through pure will and the absolute refusal to let his brothers down. What happened on that ridge violated every principle of military tactics. One man cannot stop hundreds. 5 bullets cannot defeat a battalion. Logic says Jack should have died that night. But logic didn't account for what happens when a man decides he's not moving, not retreating, not surrendering, not until every last bullet is gone and every last breath is spent. This is that story. Every word of it is true. And it starts with understanding who Jack Colbert was before the war turned him into a ghost. Jack Colbert grew up in rural Montana. Population of his town, maybe 300 people if you counted the dogs. His family had a small farm, cattle, chickens, enough crops to get by. Jack was the middle of 5 kids, quiet, polite, the kind of boy who did his chores without being asked, and never caused trouble. His teachers said he was smart but shy, kept to himself, had maybe 3 close friends in the whole school. But Jack had 2 skills that would save his life years later. First, his eyesight was exceptional. He could spot a hawk circling at distances that looked like dots to everyone else, could tell you if it was a red tail or a Cooper's just by how it moved. Second, his hands were steady. Farm work does that, fixing fence wire, milking cows, operating machinery. You learn to move deliberately, carefully, no wasted motion. When Jack turned 18 in 1942, he did what most young men were doing. He enlisted, walked into the recruiting office in town, and signed up for the Army. The recruiter asked him if he could shoot. Jack shrugged. I hunt, for food mostly, deer, elk when we're lucky. You any good? I don't waste ammunition. Can't afford to. That answer got the recruiter's attention. In the Army, ammunition discipline was everything. Soldiers who could make every shot count were worth their weight in gold. Jack went through basic training without fanfare. He wasn't the fastest runner, wasn't the strongest, wasn't the loudest or most aggressive. But on the rifle range, something happened. Jack didn't just qualify. He shot expert scores that made the instructors stop and watch. Groups so tight they looked like one hole in the target. When asked how he did it, Jack said, I just breathe slow and squeeze gentle. Like you're not trying to shoot, you're just letting the rifle do what it wants to do. The instructors looked at each other. This kid was special. Jack got assigned to sniper training, not because he asked for it, because the Army recognized something in him, a calmness under pressure, a patience that most 19-year-olds don't have. Jack's best friend from training, a guy named Tommy Rodriguez from Texas, said something about Jack that stuck with everyone who knew him. Jack wasn't born a killer. He was the gentlest guy I knew, but he had this thing about him. Once he decided to do something, nothing could stop him. He just refused to lose. That refusal to lose would be tested in ways nobody could imagine.
Let me explain what the Pacific War was like, because if you've only seen movies, you don't understand the reality. This wasn't Europe with clear front lines and conventional battles. This was hell disguised as paradise. Jungles so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead, heat that left you dizzy and hallucinating. humidity that made every breath feel like drowning, diseases, malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, that killed more men than bullets, and an enemy that fought with fanatical determination. The Japanese didn't retreat, they didn't surrender. They charged with bayonets even when they were outnumbered and outgunned. They infiltrated lines at night and killed sentries silently. They tied themselves to trees so they could keep fighting after being shot. This created a different kind of warfare: psychological, brutal, personal. And snipers became some of the most valuable and most hated soldiers in the Pacific. A good sniper could stop an entire advance, could kill officers and NCOs, destroying command structure, could create fear and paranoia that made enemy soldiers hesitant to move. The Japanese had excellent snipers. They'd tie themselves high in trees and wait for days without moving. They'd shoot medics and radio operators, specifically to demoralize American units. But American snipers were learning, adapting, becoming just as deadly. Jack Colbert was one of them. By late 1944, he'd been in the Pacific for 18 months. He'd fought on 3 different islands. His official kill count was 47 confirmed enemy soldiers. But Jack never talked about it, never bragged. When other soldiers swapped war stories, Jack stayed quiet, did his job, and kept to himself. His squad mates respected that. They knew Jack had their backs, knew that if they were pinned down, Jack would find the enemy position and eliminate it. Quietly, efficiently. What they didn't know was that Jack was about to face a situation that would test everything he'd learned, everything he was capable of, everything he believed about himself. Because war has a way of finding your limits, and then pushing you past them. November 1944, the island of Leyte in the Philippines. The Americans were pushing inland against fierce Japanese resistance. Jack's unit, Company B, 127th Infantry Regiment, was part of a larger offensive to secure a strategic ridge system, high ground that overlooked supply routes and communication lines. The battle had been brutal. 3 days of continuous fighting. The Japanese were dug in and fighting for every yard. American casualties were mounting. On the afternoon of November 18th, Jack's company took heavy fire from a Japanese position on a ridge called Hill 522. The fighting was vicious. Close quarters, grenades, bayonets, men dying in mud that was more blood than water. By late afternoon, the Americans had taken the hill, but they'd paid for it. Half the company was casualties. The survivors were exhausted, low on ammunition, and badly shaken. That's when the scouts reported bad news. A large Japanese force, battalion strength, maybe 400 men, was moving to counterattack. They'd hit the hill after dark, overwhelm the depleted American forces, and retake the position. The company commander made a hard decision. They had to evacuate, pull back to defensible positions, get the wounded out before the Japanese counterattack arrived. But someone had to slow down that Japanese battalion, buy time for the evacuation, hold the ridge long enough for everyone to get clear. That meant a rear guard, a small team that would stay behind while everyone else retreated. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. The commander called for volunteers. Jack raised his hand immediately. "Colbert, this isn't a normal sniper mission. You'll be alone up there. No support, no reinforcements, and we don't have much ammunition to spare." Jack nodded. "How much can you give me?" The commander checked with the supply sergeant. The answer was grim. The company had burned through their ammunition reserves. They barely had enough for the retreat. 7 rounds. That's all we can spare. 7 bullets to stop a battalion. It was absurd. Impossible. But Jack took the ammunition without hesitation. "That'll do." The commander studied Jack's face, looking for doubt, fear, hesitation. He didn't find any. "Colbert, if it gets bad up there, if they're going to overrun you, fall back. You hear me? Don't die for nothing." Jack picked up his rifle and checked the action. "If they get past me, they reach our wounded. That's not happening." He said it quietly, matter-of-factly, like he was stating a simple truth rather than making a heroic declaration. And that's when everyone realized Jack wasn't planning to fall back. He was planning to hold that ridge or die trying. Tommy Rodriguez grabbed Jack's shoulder. "Brother, this is crazy. You can't stop a battalion with 7 bullets." Jack smiled slightly. "Then I better not miss." He turned and headed back up the ridge, alone, with 7 rounds of ammunition and the weight of everyone's survival on his shoulders.
Jack positioned himself carefully. He didn't choose the highest point on the ridge, that would be too obvious. He found a spot about 30 yards below the crest, where vegetation was thick and the sight lines were perfect. He could see three different approaches the Japanese would likely use. He had good cover, and most importantly, his position was nearly impossible to spot from below. Jack began his ritual, the same routine he did before every mission, moving slowly, deliberately, each action purposeful. He gathered mud and rubbed it on his face, neck, and hands, broke off small branches and tucked them into his uniform, arranged leaves around his position. When he was done, he was invisible, just another shadow in the jungle. He checked his rifle, the Springfield M1903, a beautiful weapon, old-fashioned compared to the newer semi-automatic rifles, but deadly accurate in trained hands. And Jack's hands were as trained as they come. 7 rounds in the internal magazine, he chambered 1, 6 left in reserve. Jack settled into position and began the waiting. This is what most people don't understand about snipers. The shooting is maybe 1% of the job. The rest is patience, stillness, breathing, becoming part of the environment, not a person, just a feature of the landscape that happens to have a rifle. The sun set, darkness fell, the jungle sounds changed, day insects going quiet, night creatures beginning their chorus. Somewhere in the distance, Jack could hear the evacuation, quiet voices, careful footsteps, his brothers moving to safety. He was alone now, truly alone. No backup, no support, just him and his rifle and the darkness. Then he heard them coming. Footsteps, lots of them. Whispered commands in Japanese, the rustle of hundreds of men moving through jungle at night. The counterattack had begun. Jack's heart rate slowed. This is what good snipers train themselves to do. When the pressure increases, you go the opposite direction. You become calmer, quieter, more focused. He controlled his breathing, into the nose, out to the mouth, slow and steady, bringing his heart rate down to maybe 50 beats per minute. Through his rifle scope, Jack could see movement below, shadows becoming shapes, shapes becoming men, dozens of them. No, hundreds. The Japanese scouts had been right. This was a full battalion. The Japanese were moving tactically, small groups spread out, scouts leading the way, officers in the middle directing movement. These weren't inexperienced troops. This was a professional military force executing a night assault. And Jack was one guy with 7 bullets. He watched them come, patient, not rushing, waiting for the right moment. The Japanese scouts reached a position about 200 yards below Jack. They stopped, signaling the main force. The assault was about to begin. Jack had to make a decision. He could shoot now, try to kill as many as possible, but 7 bullets against hundreds wouldn't stop them. They'd just rush the position and overwhelm him. Or he could do something different, something psychological. Jack aimed carefully at the lead scout, a sergeant based on his position and the way the other soldiers deferred to him. Range, 220 yards. Downhill angle, slight wind from the east. Jack made the calculations automatically, adjusted his aim 2 inches to compensate for wind, 1 inch high to account for the downhill angle. He stopped breathing. The world narrowed to just the crosshairs and the target. He squeezed the trigger. Not jerked, squeezed. So smooth that the rifle fired almost as a surprise. The Springfield barked, the recoil pushed back against Jack's shoulder. 220 yards away, the Japanese sergeant dropped like someone had cut his strings. Chaos erupted below. Soldiers dove for cover. Officers shouted orders. The entire battalion stopped advancing because they didn't know where the shot came from. They didn't know if it was one sniper or a squad. They didn't know if this was the main American defensive position. Uncertainty, doubt, fear. Jack had just weaponized all 3. 6 bullets left.
The Japanese did what Jack expected. They went into search mode. Small teams began moving up the ridge, trying to locate the sniper, find him, kill him, then continue the assault. But they moved cautiously now, scared. Nobody wanted to be the next one shot by the invisible ghost in the darkness. Jack watched them come. He'd moved position after the first shot, standard sniper procedure. You shoot and move, never stay in the same place. His new position was 40 yards to the left and slightly higher.
Different angle, different field of view. The Japanese would be looking for him where he'd been, not where he was. Two groups of Japanese soldiers were advancing, one moving straight up the ridge, the other flanking to the right. Smart tactics. Box in the sniper. Force him to engage one group while the other closes in. Jack let them come. Patience. Always patience. The flanking group reached a position where they thought they were safe, hidden behind rocks. They were setting up a machine gun. Once that gun was operational, they'd suppress the area where they thought Jack was while the assault group rushed his position. Good plan, except Jack wasn't where they thought he was. He aimed at the machine gunner, a difficult shot. The soldier was partially hidden. Jack could only see his head and upper torso. Range, 180 yards. The man was moving, setting up the weapon. Jack waited, controlled his breathing, let his heart rate drop. The machine gunner paused for just a second, adjusting the gun's position. That was enough. Jack fired. The machine gunner collapsed onto his weapon, dead before he hit the ground. More chaos, more fear. The Japanese soldiers didn't know what to do. The sniper wasn't where he should be. He was somewhere else, somewhere they couldn't pinpoint. They began firing wildly into the jungle, dozens of rifles shooting at shadows, wasting ammunition, revealing their positions. Jack didn't return fire. He just watched, memorizing positions, counting soldiers, planning his next move. 5 bullets left, and the real battle was just beginning. The Japanese commander below was getting frustrated. Jack could tell by the tone of the orders being shouted. Angry, urgent, demanding results. The commander was sending more men up the ridge, not cautiously anymore, aggressively. He wanted the sniper found and killed so the assault could continue. Jack counted at least 50 soldiers spreading out and moving up the hillside. 50 men hunting for one. This was the moment where most snipers would retreat. The odds were impossible. You can't fight 50 men with 5 bullets. But Jack had made a promise. They don't get past me. They don't reach our wounded. So he didn't retreat. He adapted. Jack started moving, not away from the enemy, perpendicular to them, sliding through the jungle like a ghost, using terrain and vegetation to stay invisible. He moved to a position where the assault groups would converge, a natural choke point where the ridge narrowed. They'd have to pass through it to reach the top, and Jack would be waiting. He settled into his new hide, covered himself with vegetation, became invisible again. The Japanese were getting close. He could hear them breathing, hear their equipment creaking, hear whispered communications as they tried to coordinate their movements. They were maybe 50 yards below Jack's position now, close enough that he could make out faces in the moonlight. Young men, scared, but determined to do their duty. Jack didn't think about that, couldn't think about that. In war, hesitation kills you. Sympathy kills you. You do your job or people die. It's that simple and that terrible. An officer emerged from the jungle below. He was directing soldiers, pointing them to different positions, organizing the assault. He was the key. Take him out and the coordination falls apart. Jack aimed. Range, 90 yards. Almost point blank for a skilled sniper. But the shot was through vegetation, leaves and branches that could deflect the bullet. He waited for a clear moment. The officer stepped into an opening. Clear line of sight. 2 seconds of opportunity. Jack fired. The officer dropped. The soldiers around him froze in confusion. Their leader was down. Who was in command now? What were they supposed to do? 4 bullets left, and the Japanese were close now. Too close for comfort. He could hear them on 3 sides. They were surrounding his position without realizing it. Another minute, and they'd stumble onto him. Time to move again. But moving meant making noise, and noise meant being spotted. Jack had no choice. He low-crawled backwards, moving an inch at a time, agonizingly slow, his face in the mud, branches scraping his back, every muscle screaming at him to move faster. But speed meant death. He crawled for 10 minutes, maybe traveled 30 feet, but those 30 feet might as well have been 30 miles. They put him outside the encirclement. 3 Japanese soldiers passed within 5 feet of where Jack had been, so close that he could have reached out and touched them. But he was gone, a ghost that left no trace. What happened next is where the story gets truly unbelievable. And if it wasn't documented by multiple witnesses who saw the aftermath, nobody would believe it. The Japanese were frustrated. They'd been on this ridge for over an hour. They'd lost 4 men, including 2 leaders, and they still hadn't found the sniper. Their commander made a decision. He sent scouts with knives to crawl up the ridge. Silent infiltration. Get close enough to rush the sniper before he could shoot them all. Jack watched them come. 3 soldiers moving on their bellies through the mud, knives in their teeth. Expert fieldcraft. These were experienced jungle fighters, and they were coming right toward his position. Jack couldn't shoot. 3 targets moving in darkness, he'd get maybe 1 before the others were on him. And he only had 4 bullets left. He couldn't waste them on targets he wasn't certain of hitting. So Jack did something that took more courage than any shot he'd taken. He let them come. Let them get close, knife fighting distance, where his rifle would be useless. Jack slowly, quietly, drew his bayonet, fixed it to his rifle, shifted his position to prepare for close combat. The 3 Japanese soldiers were 15 feet away, 10 feet, 5 feet. In the darkness, neither side could see the other clearly, just shadows and shapes. One of the Japanese soldiers crawled right past Jack, so close that Jack could hear him breathing, could smell the sweat on his uniform.
The soldier paused, sensing something, his instincts telling him something was wrong. Jack moved, fast and silent. The bayonet came up and struck. The soldier died without making a sound. Jack lowered the body carefully to the ground. No noise, no alert to the others. The second soldier heard something, a rustle. He turned toward the sound. Jack was already moving. In close combat, speed is everything. The soldier tried to bring his knife up, but Jack was faster. A brutal, efficient strike. The soldier collapsed. The third soldier realized what was happening, started to shout a warning. Jack lunged. His hand covered the soldier's mouth as the bayonet struck home. The shout became a muffled gasp. 3 Japanese soldiers dead within 10 seconds, in complete silence. No gunshots, no alerts. Jack was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from adrenaline, from the horror of what close combat requires. He'd just killed 3 men with his hands and a blade. This wasn't the clinical distance of sniper work. This was personal, intimate, terrible. Jack wiped the blade on the mud and pushed the bodies under some vegetation, moved to a new position. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the psychological weight of what he'd just done. But he couldn't process it, couldn't think about it, because there were still hundreds of enemy soldiers on this ridge, and he still had a job to do. 4 bullets left, and the night was far from over. Below Jack's position, the Japanese commander was losing his mind. His assault had stalled completely. Men were refusing to advance. The few who'd gone forward hadn't returned. The commander thought he was facing a squad of snipers, maybe a platoon. There was no way 1 man could be doing this. No way 1 man could be in multiple positions, could hit targets with perfect accuracy, could kill silently in the dark. It had to be multiple shooters, had to be. So the commander changed tactics. Instead of sending small groups, he'd mass his forces, send 100 men up the ridge at once. Overwhelm the American position through sheer numbers. Someone would get through. Someone would take out the snipers. Jack saw the assault forming, soldiers gathering below, getting organized. This wasn't a probe anymore. This was the real attack, the one that would either break through or break apart. He had 4 bullets left, 4 chances to stop 100 men. The math didn't work. It was impossible. But Jack Colbert had already done several impossible things tonight. What was one more? He studied the assault formation, looking for leverage, for the pressure point that would collapse the whole thing. He found it. A captain was organizing the assault, positioning soldiers, giving final orders. He was the linchpin, the one holding this whole attack together. If Jack could take him out at the critical moment, right when the assault was launching, the attack might falter, might dissolve into confusion and fear. It was a gamble, but Jack was out of safe options. He watched the captain, waited for the moment. The assault was forming up, soldiers getting ready to charge. The captain raised his sword, ready to give the order. Jack fired. The bullet crossed 150 yards and hit the captain in the chest. The sword fell from his hand. The captain crumpled to the ground. For a moment, nothing happened. The Japanese soldiers just stood there, shocked. Their leader was down, again. Another commander killed by the ghost sniper. Then panic set in. Soldiers started backing up. Some began running. The assault dissolved before it even started. Officers below were shouting, trying to restore order. But the damage was done. The men had lost confidence. They'd lost faith that they could beat this invisible enemy. 3 bullets left. Jack watched as the Japanese forces began pulling back, regrouping. They weren't retreating, not yet. But they weren't attacking either. They were reassessing, trying to figure out what they were really facing. Jack used the lull to move again. His body was screaming at him. He'd been in position for hours without food or water. His muscles were cramping. His eyes were burning from exhaustion. But he couldn't rest. The Japanese would try again. They had to. They couldn't let one sniper stop an entire battalion. Their honor demanded they succeed. And Jack knew the next assault would be different. They'd learn from their mistakes. They'd be smarter, more cautious, more coordinated. He had 3 bullets left to stop whatever they threw at him next. An hour passed, then another. Jack used the time to scout new positions, to memorize every inch of terrain, to plan escape routes if things went completely wrong. But mostly, he waited, because that's what snipers do. They wait. Around 3 a.m., the Japanese tried something different. They sent soldiers up the backside of the ridge, a route Jack couldn't cover from his position. They were trying to get above him, cut off his retreat. Jack heard them climbing. The sounds were faint but unmistakable. 20 or 30 men working their way up the steep backslope. If they succeeded, Jack would be trapped, surrounded, game over. He made a hard decision. He had to stop that flanking maneuver, which meant moving to a position where he could interdict it, which meant exposing himself to the forces below. Jack moved quickly. Speed versus stealth. He had to reach the new position before the Japanese climbers made it to the top. He ran through the jungle, abandoning all attempts at concealment. Branches whipped his face. Thorns tore his uniform. He didn't care. He had to get there in time. Jack reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked the back approach. He could see the Japanese soldiers below, climbing toward him. They were close, maybe 2 minutes from reaching the ridge stop. He had 3 bullets, 20-plus targets. He aimed at the lead climber, the one in front who'd reached the top first. Range, 60 yards, steep angle, moving target. He fired. The lead climber fell backwards, knocking 2 soldiers below him off the ridge. They tumbled down, taking others with them. The climbing assault stopped. Soldiers clung to rocks, afraid to move, afraid to be the next target. 2 bullets left. Jack shifted his aim to a soldier who was trying to find where the shot came from. Fired. Another hit. Another soldier falling. 1 bullet left. The Japanese soldiers on the backslope retreated, climbed back down. They'd failed to flank the sniper, failed to trap him. Jack was down to his last bullet, 1 round between him and being defenseless. But something had changed. The Japanese weren't attacking anymore. They were pulling back, consolidating, waiting for daylight, which meant Jack had a few hours to hold, a few hours for his brothers to complete the evacuation and reach safety. He'd done it. With 7 bullets, now 6, he had stopped a battalion. But the night was not over, and Jack was about to face his hardest moment yet.
Around 4 a.m., 3 Japanese soldiers stumbled onto Jack's position. They weren't searching for him. They were just moving through the jungle, trying to return to their lines, lost and disoriented in the darkness. They walked within 10 feet of where Jack was hiding. If he stayed still, they'd pass by. They'd never know he was there. But one of them stopped, sensed something, started looking around. Jack had 1 bullet left. If he shot, the entire Japanese force would know his position. They'd converge on him. He'd die. But if he didn't shoot, these 3 soldiers might spot him, sound the alarm. Same result. He had seconds to decide. Jack made his choice.
He didn't shoot. He moved. Jack surged up from his hide and struck the nearest soldier with his rifle butt. The man dropped. The other two soldiers reacted, bringing their weapons up. Jack was faster. He'd spent the last 6 hours in pure survival mode. His body moved on instinct, training, muscle memory. He struck the second soldier with his bayonet, spun and engaged the third with the rifle as a club. All 3 soldiers went down in under 5 seconds. None of them had time to shout, to fire a shot, to alert anyone. Jack stood over the bodies, breathing hard. His rifle was slick with blood. His hands were shaking. This was beyond anything he'd trained for, beyond anything he had imagined he was capable of. He wasn't a sniper anymore. He was something else, something primal and terrifying, a weapon forged by necessity and desperation. Jack cleaned his rifle as best he could, checked the last bullet, made sure it was still operational. 1 round. That's all he had left. But the evacuation was complete. His brothers were safe. The wounded were clear. The mission was accomplished. Now he just had to survive until dawn, then find a way back to friendly lines, through hundreds of enemy soldiers who wanted him dead. As the first light of dawn broke over the ridge, Jack assessed his situation. He'd been awake for over 24 hours. He'd gone from 7 bullets to 1. He'd killed at least 7 enemy soldiers with his rifle and 6 more in close combat. He'd held a strategic position against a battalion-sized force. And somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. Below his position, Jack could see the Japanese forces in the gray dawn light. They were regrouping, organizing a proper dawn assault with reconnaissance and support. But they were also moving slowly, carefully, afraid of the ghost sniper who'd haunted them all night. Jack used their caution to his advantage. He began moving down the backside of the ridge, away from the Japanese positions, toward where he hoped the American lines had reformed. He moved like a ghost, using every trick he'd learned, every skill he'd developed, sliding between shadows, freezing at every sound. It took him 2 hours to travel less than a mile. 2 hours of pure tension, of being one careless sound away from discovery. But he made it. Jack reached a position where he could see American forces in the distance. His brothers. Safety. He was almost home. Then he heard voices behind him. Japanese voices. Close. A patrol had spotted his tracks. They were following him. Jack turned and saw them. 4 soldiers, maybe 50 yards away and closing fast. They'd seen him. He had 1 bullet left. 4 targets. No chance. But Jack wasn't going to die now. Not after everything. Not when he was this close to making it home. He raised his rifle, aimed at the lead Japanese soldier, the one in front who was pointing at Jack and shouting to his comrades. Jack fired his last bullet. The soldier dropped. The other 3 dove for cover. That gave Jack the seconds he needed. He ran. Not tactically, not carefully, just ran. Full sprint through the jungle toward the American lines. Bullets snapped past him. The Japanese were shooting, but Jack was moving and they were rattled. Their shots went wide. American sentries saw him coming, saw the Japanese chasing him. They opened fire, suppressing the pursuing patrol. Jack crashed through the American perimeter and collapsed. He couldn't stand anymore. His legs just gave out. Tommy Rodriguez was there, pulling him to cover. "Jack, holy shit, you're alive! We thought you were dead!" Jack lay in the mud, gasping for breath. His rifle fell from his hands. Empty. Used up. Just like him. "The wounded?" Jack managed to ask. "Everyone make it out?" "Everyone made it. You held them off long enough. We got everyone to safety." Jack closed his eyes. The mission was complete. His brothers were safe. That's all that mattered. Later that day, after Jack had been checked by medics and given water and food, the company commander came to see him. "Colbert, what happened up there? We heard shooting all night. How many Japanese did you face?" Jack thought about it. Battalion strength. Maybe 400. The commander stared at him. 400? And you held them off? With 7 bullets? "Yes, sir." "How many did you kill?" Jack was quiet for a moment. Counting. Remembering. Each shot. Each desperate hand-to-hand fight. 13 confirmed. Maybe more. Hard to say for certain. The commander just shook his head in bewilderment. 13 enemy soldiers, 7 bullets, and you held off a battalion-sized assault. How? Jack looked at his rifle, at his empty hands, at the mud and blood still caked on his uniform. I didn't let them pass, sir. That was the job. So I didn't let them pass. It was the most Jack had said about the battle, and the only explanation he ever gave. The Army awarded Jack the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. The citation talked about extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty. But what it really honored was something simpler. A man who refused to quit, who held the line when the line seemed unholdable, who did the impossible because the alternative was unacceptable. After the war, Jack Colbert went home to Montana. He went back to farming, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 kids. He never talked about the war, not to his wife, not to his kids, not to anyone. When people in town learned he'd won the Distinguished Service Cross, they'd ask him about it. What did you do to earn that? Jack would shrug. Just did my job. Nothing special. Nothing special. That's how he described holding off a battalion with 7 bullets. His kids didn't learn the full story until after he died in 1987. The Army sent representatives to the funeral with full military honors. They told the family what Jack had done, how many lives he had saved, and how his actions had been studied in military schools as an example of individual courage under impossible odds. The family was shocked. Their father, the quiet farmer who never raised his voice, who spent his Sundays fishing and his evenings reading, had been a legendary sniper who'd done something that shouldn't be possible. One of Jack's sons said, "He was the gentlest man I ever knew. He coached my Little League team, he helped neighbors fix fences, he rescued injured animals and nursed them back to health. I can't reconcile that man with the warrior who held off a battalion." But that's the thing about real warriors. They're not violent by nature. They're not aggressive or cruel. They're people who, when faced with an impossible situation, found a way to do what needed to be done. Jack didn't enjoy what he did on that ridge. He didn't glorify it. He carried it quietly for the rest of his life. But he did it. When everything said he should fail, when logic said he should die, when the odds were literally hundreds to 1 against him, he held the line.
Let me explain what Jack Colbert actually did. Because the story sounds like Hollywood fiction. One man with 7 bullets, stopping a battalion, that's not possible. Except, it is possible. If you understand the psychology of what Jack was doing. Jack wasn't trying to kill 400 men with 7 bullets. That would be impossible. What he was doing was breaking their will, making them afraid, creating uncertainty. Every time Jack killed a Japanese soldier, especially a leader, he created chaos. The assault would stall. Soldiers would take cover. Time would be wasted regrouping and planning. And each time the assault stalled, the Japanese commander had to make a decision. Do we press forward into the teeth of what seems like a fortified position, or do we be cautious and preserve our men's lives? Caution won every time, because Jack made them believe they were facing a larger force than they were. That's psychological warfare. That's making one rifle do the work of 20 by choosing your targets carefully and timing your shots for maximum disruption. Add to that Jack's fieldcraft, his ability to move unseen, to become invisible, to reposition constantly so the enemy couldn't pin him down. He was fighting like a ghost, appearing, striking, vanishing. The Japanese soldiers weren't cowards. They were brave, professional troops, but they were human. And humans are wired to fear the unknown, the invisible threat, the sniper who could be anywhere. Jack weaponized that fear, and it multiplied his effectiveness far beyond what 7 bullets should logically achieve. But here's the other part that's easy to miss. Jack's physical and mental endurance. He held that ridge for 14 hours. 14 hours of constant tension. No food, no water, no rest. His body was in pure survival mode, running on adrenaline and willpower. Most people would collapse after 3 or 4 hours of that kind of stress. Jack went 14. That's not normal. That's not training. That's something deeper. That's a man who decided he would hold until he physically couldn't hold anymore, and then finding a way to hold a little longer. There's a moment in Jack's story that I keep coming back to. The moment when he had to engage those 3 Japanese soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. He could have used his last bullet, killed one, but then he'd be completely defenseless against the other 2. So he made the harder choice. He engaged them without shooting, using his rifle as a club, using his bayonet, using his hands. That took more courage than any sniper shot, because it meant close combat, personal, brutal, the kind of fighting that leaves psychological scars. Jack did it because he had to, because that last bullet might be the difference between living and dying later in the night. That's the discipline, the calculation, the cold logic that great warriors have. Making the hard decision in the moment because it gives you the best chance of completing the mission. Jack wasn't thinking about survival, he was thinking about holding that ridge, about protecting his brothers, about the mission. And when the mission required him to fight hand-to-hand against 3 enemy soldiers rather than waste his last bullet, he did it. That's what separates warriors from soldiers. Soldiers follow orders and do their job. Warriors do whatever is necessary to accomplish the mission, even when what's necessary is terrifying. After the war, military strategists studied what Jack did on that ridge. They tried to understand how one man stopped a battalion. The consensus was that Jack had executed a perfect economy of force defense. He'd used minimal resources, 7 bullets, to achieve maximum effect by targeting leaders and disrupting enemy coordination. But they also noted that Jack's success required several factors that can't be taught. Natural ability, years of hunting experience, exceptional physical and mental endurance, and most importantly, an unbreakable will. You can teach someone to shoot, you can teach tactics and fieldcraft, but you can't teach someone to hold their ground when everything says they should run. You can't teach someone to keep fighting when their body is screaming to quit. Jack had that quality, that stubborn refusal to accept defeat, that iron will that kept him on that ridge when every instinct said to retreat. Where does that come from? Nobody really knows. Some people have it, most don't. And you often don't know if you have it until you're tested. Jack got tested, and he proved he had it, in the most extreme way possible. Let me tell you what the Japanese commander said after the battle, because his perspective is important. After the war, during interviews with captured Japanese officers, one captain described the assault on Hill 522. He described encountering what he called the ghost. He said, "We thought we were facing a platoon of snipers, maybe more. The shooting came from different positions. The accuracy was perfect. Every shot killed a leader or a key soldier. We lost 13 men and the assault never even reached the American positions. When we learned later that it was only one American sniper with 7 bullets, we didn't believe it. That's not possible. One man cannot stop a battalion." But he did. The captain paused, then added, "I'm glad we didn't know it was only one man. If we had known, we would have pressed harder, would have sacrificed more men to overwhelm him. But because we thought we were facing a strong defensive position, we were cautious. That caution saved American lives and cost us the assault." That's the ultimate compliment from an enemy. Acknowledgement that they were outfought not by superior numbers or firepower, but by superior will and tactics. Jack made them think they were facing something they couldn't beat, and so they didn't beat it. There's one more thing I want you to understand about Jack Colbert's story. It's not really about the shooting. It's about the choice. The choice to raise his hand when the commander asked for volunteers, the choice to stay on that ridge when retreating would have been justified, the choice to keep fighting when he was down to 1 bullet and common sense said he should run. Every moment of that night, Jack chose to hold, chose to fight, chose to endure. And every one of those choices mattered. Every one of those choices saved lives. The wounded men who evacuated safely, the medics who didn't die carrying them, the soldiers who lived to fight another day.
Jack's choices rippled outward, created futures that wouldn't have existed if he'd chosen differently. That's the real lesson here. Your choices matter, especially the hard ones, especially when the stakes are highest.
Jack chose courage over safety, chose duty over survival, and those choices defined not just his own life, but the lives of everyone he saved. When Jack died in 1987, he was buried in a small cemetery in Montana. Military headstone. Simple, understated, like the man himself. But at his funeral, something remarkable happened. 7 elderly men showed up who Jack's family didn't recognize. They'd traveled from across the country, some from different states. They were the men Jack had saved. The wounded soldiers who evacuated from Hill 522 while Jack held the ridge. Some of them had been carried on stretchers, unconscious, not even knowing what was happening. But they'd learned later. They'd learned that one sniper had held off a battalion so they could reach safety, and they'd never forgotten. They came to say goodbye to the man who gave them a future, who gave them the chance to go home, marry, have children, live full lives. One of them, an old man with a cane, spoke at the service, his voice shaking with emotion. "Jack never knew us. We were just wounded soldiers that needed evacuation. Just faces on stretchers. But to us, he was everything. He was the difference between dying on that island and making it home. People talk about heroes, about what makes someone a hero. I'll tell you what makes a hero. It's standing alone in the dark, with nothing but courage and a handful of bullets, and deciding that nobody gets past you. Nobody. Jack Colbert was my hero, and I never got to thank him while he was alive. So I'm thanking him now." The 7 old soldiers saluted Jack's casket, a final honor for the man who'd saved their lives 53 years earlier. That's legacy. Not medals, not citations, but lives saved, futures created, families that exist because one man refused to quit. So what's the real story here? What's the lesson from Jack Colbert's last stand on Hill 522? It's not that you should take suicidal risks. It's not that one person can always beat impossible odds. The lesson is about character, about what you're capable of when the stakes are highest, about what happens when you refuse to accept defeat. Jack Colbert wasn't superhuman. He was a farm kid from Montana with good eyesight and steady hands. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. Until he was tested. And when that test came, when he was asked to do the impossible, he found a way. Not because he was special, but because he decided that failure wasn't an option. That's available to all of us. That reserve of strength, that refusal to quit, that stubborn determination to hold the line no matter what. You don't know if you have it until you're tested. Most people go their whole lives without facing the situation that pushes them to their absolute limits. Jack got tested, and he proved what one person can do when they absolutely refuse to fail. 7 bullets, 14 hours. A battalion stopped cold. Not through superior firepower, not through backup or reinforcements, but through one man's unbreakable will and the absolute refusal to let his brothers down. That's the story of Sergeant Jack Colbert, the sniper who held off a battalion with 5 bullets left. Remember his name. Remember what he did. And remember that when your moment comes, when you face your impossible odds, you have more strength than you know, more courage than you think, more endurance than seems possible. You just have to refuse to quit, have to hold the line, have to take one more breath, fire one more shot, take one more step, just like Jack did, on a dark ridge in the Pacific, with 5 bullets left and hundreds of enemy soldiers coming for him. He held. And because he held, others lived.
That's heroism. Real heroism, not the Hollywood version. Just refusing to quit when quitting would be easy. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's the story. And it's a true story. Every word of it. Sergeant Jack Colbert, 7 bullets, 1 impossible night. And a battalion that learned what one American warrior can do when he refuses to lose. Hold the line. Whatever your line is, hold it. Just like Jack did.